Hey, this is Josh with Analog Reviews. Today we're going to be discussing the Resident Evil franchise in general, the survival horror genre, and what's happening in the game industry today. Joining me today is Nathan.
Hey.
Trent.
How's it going?
Justin.
What's up?
And Abdul.
Hello there.
Mainly we're going to be talking about Resident Evil, but I also kind of want to bring notice to what's happening with games in general, as they kind of seem to be going a little more casual, and the survival horror genre in general is kind of starting to disappear. First, let's start with your experience with Resident Evil games. Nathan, which games have you played?
I've played pretty much all of them. Like, I started with the first Resident Evil on PlayStation 1, and I've played pretty much all of them since then. I think the only one I didn't play was Dead Aim and like Survivor 2. But aside from that, I've played like all the main ones.
Abdul, when did you first start playing Resident Evil games?
I started with the release of Resident Evil 1 on the PS1. I was only 10 years old at the time, and it was actually too scary for me, so I stopped like 30 minutes into the game. I came back a few years later with Resident Evil 3, but again, because of the Nemesis, who was just too scary for me at the time, I had to quit again. And then I came back in 2005, and I played the whole series, starting from 0 all the way until 4, with Nathan. He's the one who pretty much introduced me to the series properly, and we played together.
So more or less, you started Resident Evil 1 when you were 10, and you finished it, what, when you were like 20, 23 or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Trent, what's your experience with them?
Like everyone else here, started with Resident Evil 1, played it at a buddy's house. I did almost shit my pants when the dog crashed through the window, but was still able to finish the game. Then continued on Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3. Skipped out on Code Veronica at the time of release. Skipped out on Dead Aim, skipped out on Survivor. Came back for Resident Evil 4, and then I've played pretty much all the numbered games in the series.
Cool. Justin?
I played Resident Evil 1, or Resident Evil 2 on the PS1 was the first game that I ever got. Pretty much love that game. Played every Resident Evil game after that. The mainstream ones, at least. I haven't played like Survivor and Dead Aim.
Did
I
you
played the ones on the Wii.
Did you get the first one on the PC?
Yeah, actually I did. Yeah, I didn't even remember that.
Yeah, I remember you
I
had
got
that
the first one. That was actually the first one I beat. Then I got a PS1 and played Resident Evil 2.
And my own experience with Resident Evil games, I've played every single one of them but Gaiden. One of the biggest Resident Evil fans out there. I live and breathe that game. Abdul, what's your favorite game in the series?
It has to be Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. I just loved playing in a huge city. It was something we were not very familiar with in the PS1 era. And the Nemesis was a very unique boss and very iconic indeed. And for years I dreaded Nemesis until I was finally able to overcome it and beat the game with Nathan.
So Nemesis was primarily what drove you to liking that game over the others. What would you kind of have as a follow-up?
The follow-up would definitely be Code Veronica. I liked the big plot twist at the end. I don't know if we could mention spoilers here, but definitely
the games are
in Code Veronica were also memorable.
Cool. Nathan, which one do you like?
It's kind of a tough question. It's kind of a tie for me between Resident Evil 2 when it first came out was amazing, but if I were to compare them all today in terms of the best Resident Evil game, I'd say it's going to be either the Resident Evil 1 remake for the GameCube, which in my opinion is probably the scariest game ever made, and one of the hardest, or Resident Evil 4.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat with you. My opinion of what the best Resident Evil game is changes day to day. Today I'm going to go with Resident Evil 2, but it's really close between the remake because it is kind of the pinnacle of the survival horror genre for me. Resident Evil 2 I felt had the most impact when it came out, and is one of the best sequels to any game ever. And Resident Evil 4 is the best of the new third-person Resident Evils, and 5 and 6 just didn't live up to the legacy that one set forward. Trent, which ones do you like?
Unquestionably, Resident Evil 4 is my favorite. I was never a big fan of the tank controls, actually, and I felt like the changes they made to Resident Evil 4 were a really good compromise between keeping your movement limited, so kind of, you know, still scary because your view is still limited. It still felt a little clunky compared to a regular third-person action game, but I didn't feel like I was fighting with the controls, and that really opened up Resident Evil to me.
And Justin?
I'd have to say Resident Evil 2, because it was my first, and it was the first time well, actually, I guess the first one was my first. That was the first console Resident Evil I played, I guess. So I'd have to say that one, or the fourth, just because it was so innovative at the time. There was really no other game that was doing what Resident Evil 4 was doing.
So we got 3 for number 2. You said number 2, Nathan? Or...
Yeah, it's close for me, but yeah, I'd say probably Resident Evil 2 overall.
And what was your favorite monster in the series? We'll start with Justin on that one.
That's definitely the Tyrant. It's hands down.
Which one?
The second one, Trent. He was just... This is one of the only bosses that would just appear out of nowhere. You'd have to fight him like so many times. It wouldn't be like a real like boss battle. He'd just appear out of nowhere and just try to kill you, and you just like run away.
Yeah, the funny thing about that, it's one of those bosses from the second scenario. So a lot of people played through Resident Evil and never even saw that boss. That would actually be my favorite monster as well. I like Nemesis a lot, but I felt without Nemesis without the T-103 Mr. X, that Nemesis wouldn't have existed, and Nemesis was kind of an expansion upon him, that a foundation that he built. I just liked his character design and the way that he appeared in games. I remember the part where you're in the abandoned factory and you're looking in the surveillance camera, and he walks up and punches it, and then you gotta turn around and fight him. That was pretty awesome, as well as that part where you're doing the puzzle with the torches, I believe, and he busts through the wall, and then you go back out in the hallway and he follows you into that. I felt that was kind of the pinnacle of a Resident Evil bad guy. He was completely unexpected, even from starting the first campaign. Abdul, which one do you think is the best? Probably Nemesis.
Well, definitely Nemesis. I mean, he's the reason why Resident Evil 3 is my favorite game. I just loved his dedication to destroy STARS members at all costs. He had very few lines, but to me, they were very effective.
Yeah, I believe he had one.
Yeah. When he said it pierced through my soul. It felt like he was talking to me. He's my favorite boss.
And Trent?
Well, you know, we've kind of discussed Tyrant. He's definitely the best, but I'll go ahead and mention Verdugo as well. Salazar's right-hand man. Pretty freakish creature design. The boss battle with him is pretty intense, particularly if you didn't have the rocket launcher. So, yeah, I mean, the first time I fought him, no rocket launcher, had to sit and survive. Wasted all my damn ammo, but got the best of that bastard on the second run through.
Yeah, Vertigo was pretty cool. He didn't have that recurring thing that a lot of Resident Evil bosses have, like Nemesis, Birkin, and Mr. X, but he did have that. He was a cool singular boss fight, and he was pretty much completely optional as well. You had to wait for the elevator to come, and you could either survive or try and kill him in that time using the environment around him. And Nathan, which one did you like?
For me, the Tyrant and the Nemesis are definitely way up there, but for me, I'd say the Crimson Head from the Resident Evil 1 remake. It's just so unexpected, because, you know, if you've played the original Resident Evil 1 for PlayStation, you get kind of overconfident. You basically think, oh, these graphics are amazing, but, you know, I remember this room, I remember this room. But then you notice that the zombies you kill, they just stay on the ground. Their bodies never disappear. and your first time playing, you're generally, you don't know that you're supposed to burn the bodies on the ground, and when that first Crimson Head just pops up, it just scares the hell out of you. I'd also like to mention the Regenerator from Resident Evil 4. Like, Resident Evil 4 overall wasn't really a scary game compared to the other Resident Evils, but the Regenerator was terrifying during that.
Yeah, they were definitely pretty cool.
Man.
Yeah. And they had their own music and everything too. They're just kind of creepy.
One thing I loved about the Crimson Heads was, well, when I first played the remake with Nathan, I was impressed that, wow, these bodies do not disappear like other games. It must be because of the GameCube's extended RAM or whatever. And I never thought that the reason they're still there was they would come back and scare you in the freakiest ways possible. What I liked the most about them was they were really unpredictable. Like, I think that if you ask the developers and you tell them except for the very first Crimson Head, if you ask them at what specific moment will they spawn back to life, I don't think there's a very accurate answer, because every time me and Nathan would go back to the same room, we would reload the same saving, and the Crimson Head would come back in different timings, in different ways. So this one time, I was crossing over the dead body of the Crimson Head, and he never got back up until I made it to the door. As soon as I was about to open the door, he started rushing at me. Other times, as soon as I entered the room, he would wake up and start coming at me. So it's really unpredictable. That's what I loved the most about Crimson Head.
Yeah, they were totally random. And I mean, some of them, they wouldn't even get up. They would just lie on the ground, and they would only get up as soon as you tried to light them on fire. You'd bend down with the lighter, try and use the kerosene, and they would like instantly get up and start attacking you.
Oh yeah.
Them sometimes. Yeah.
I think the best bad guy should be the explosive invisible zombie from the extra difficulty in the remake. That's the scariest.
It's also why that's one of the hardest games ever made. Like, I really like Dark Souls, but the Resident Evil 1 remake is 10 times harder when you play it on that hardest difficulty.
Yeah. Moving on, who would you say is your favorite character? This is kind of the last question, just pertaining towards Resident Evil only. Trent?
Oh, without question, Barry Burt. The guy's so underrated. I don't know why he's not in another Resident Evil game. I think he's only been in Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil Gaiden on the Game Boy, correct?
Yeah, except for miscellaneous appearances in other games like the end of Resident Evil 3 and Mercenaries and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Nathan, who would you say?
Without a question, Albert Wesker. He's pretty much the main villain who's consistent throughout all the Resident Evil games. He's always behind the scenes, always manipulating things. He's probably one of the best video game villains out of any video game franchise I can think of, and I was really disappointed at the end of Resident Evil 5, and when you play Resident Evil 6, having the lack of a consistent villain just kind of ruins it. I mean, Simmons is just, not even interesting at all.
He was
in
awful.
comparison.
I'm saying they're
Don't
going to
get me started
Wesker back.
on Resident Evil.
Yeah, they're both terrible. And both the villains of Resident Evil 6 were pretty awful. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and agree with Nathan about Wesker. He's my favorite bad guy. I think Resident Evil 6 was a perfect demonstration on how big of a void there is when he's not involved in a game. The story just was absolutely terrible in it. And Simmons and Carl were both, completely forgettable. Plus, he's kind of like the ultimate tyrant. He's like the last experiment of Umbrella. Abdul, who do you think is best?
For best character, I actually have two characters. The first one is Jill Valentine. The reason being, she has a strong personality. She's always self-composed, even in the worst situations, and she doesn't talk a lot. She has relatively fewer lines than other characters, but it's understandable given her personality. And my other favorite character is Rebecca Chambers, a complete opposite. For me, I personally believe that a part of success of a character in the survival horror genre is having a relatively vulnerable female character who you feel the need to protect against the overwhelming evil forces and monsters. I feel that that kind of builds a rapport between the player and the character in the game, but that's just my personal opinion. That's also why I love the Fatal Frame series, for the exact same reason.
Rebecca's a medic. She's not completely helpless. She can heal herself.
Well, of course, I meant just strength-wise.
Alright, and Justin?
I'd have to agree with most of you guys saying Albert Wesker. I feel like any game that he's not involved in is not that good. I mean, he was even involved in like Resident Evil 4 a little bit. But yeah, he's definitely the best bad guy. I mean, he's basically like a tyrant with the personalities. He's the only guy that was threatening.
Yeah, he wasn't really involved in 2, although he did have kind of a background presence in that, but I'm not too excited seeing where the story's going now with this global terror crap. We were talking a little earlier about how everyone now is pretty much a superhero since Resident Evil 4, more or less, and the survival horror genre in general is kind of starting to disappear, which kind of moves us on to our next topic, opening it up more for a discussion. What do you think is happening to the survival horror genre in general? You know, anyone who wants to start that, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's pretty simple, really. I think that with the rising development costs, I think more and more companies are becoming more conservative when it comes to the way that they set their games up, as in they want their games to appeal to the broadest possible audience, and I think the survival horror genre puts a lot of people off, forcing people to conserve ammo, forcing people to really kind of play carefully, that way they can actually make it all the way through the game. That turns a lot of people off. So unfortunately, when you have a game that costs $20 million to make, they're going to make sure that it's going to have a more action-oriented slant, it's going to appeal to the broadest possible demographic, and ultimately survival horror is kind of on the ropes as a result. I mean, you have a few good entries as far as indie games are concerned with survival horror, but as far as AAA mainstream titles are concerned, it's really disappeared.
Yeah, going off that point with what Trent said, Nathan, I know Nathan's doing a Dark Souls review right now, and he and I would make the argument that Dark Souls is actually, despite what many would think, is the best survival horror game of this generation.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Dark Souls really has a feeling of a classic survival horror game, in the fact that, you know, if you die, you lose whatever souls or humanity you're carrying. And, you know, it's a very hard game. The difficulty is similar to that of, like, the Resident Evil 1 remake. And some of the areas of the game are actually surprisingly scary. Now, in terms of Trent's point, I think he pretty much nailed it there. I think, you know, the survival horror genre is kind of dying this generation. Like, on one hand, I really love Resident Evil 4. I think it's an amazing game. And I think, you know, Resident Evil 4 sort of set the bar for third-person shooters right now. I think without Resident Evil 4, we wouldn't have games like Gears of War, Mass Effect, Dead Space. They were all sort of influenced by Resident Evil 4, but at the same time, I think it sort of transitions the survival horror genre into more of an action genre, and as a result, you know, the popular AAA titles are kind of influencing Resident Evil now. Like, if you look at Resident Evil 5 and 6, they're much more action-oriented opposed to horror, and, you know, they don't really feel like Resident Evil games anymore.
I agree. I mean, Resident Evil 4, like I said, one of my favorite Resident Evil games, but because it is the game that kind of almost, to this point, is kind of destroying Resident Evil, it was the first step in the wrong direction, although it did it well. Resident Evil 5, while I enjoyed it, if I were reviewing it, you know, 7 or 8, we played through it together. Great game, fun game to play with co-op, not a scary game, not what I'd constitute a Resident Evil game. Same with Resident Evil 6, even though it had absolutely terrible parts, it had enough enjoyable parts, plus it was a pretty lengthy game at 20 to 30 hours, which was unusual for a Resident Evil game, but it wasn't what I want to play when I play a Resident Evil game. And on that note, I'd bring up Revelations as well. I think I'm the only one that played it here, but that game is a Resident Evil game that came out recently for the 3DS, and for the most part, people say that game is pretty good, but I don't know. I don't know. While I enjoyed it as a 3DS game, I think it doesn't compare to any major title game. Key reasons being it takes you out of the survival horror atmosphere and puts you into action scenarios where you're shooting hunters with a machine gun. About it, 1 out of every 3 levels, and plus it's pretty repetitive as far as, you know, having duplicate ships and things like that. I enjoyed that game, but I would like to see more of a return to form to Resident Evil. And I know a lot of people out there would like to see something like a Resident Evil 2 remake, similar to the original remake.
You know, what I don't understand is I really wish that that Capcom would, you know, taking what I said about budgets and, you know, appealing to a mass market, I don't understand why Capcom doesn't just go ahead and try to release a brand new Resident Evil game as like an Xbox Live download or PlayStation Network download that basically encompasses all of the old tropes, the old survival horror tropes, and really kind of, you know, release something that's going to appease fans, that's going to keep people like us who've, you know, played the game since the very beginning happy, and they can continue with the AAA action bullshit direction, you know, with an actual on-disc release.
Yeah, like, I agree with that. I think Capcom really needs to either create a new IP that basically, you know, would appeal to people who like the action games, and, you know, sort of return to the roots with Resident Evil, sort of, you know, go back to how they used to feel like the Resident Evil 1 remake and, you know, Resident Evil 2 and all that. Or they can, you know, pretty much just make a new survival horror IP and keep Resident Evil in, like, the action direction that it's, like, following now.
I mean, I agree, but I just think that they don't think that it's worth it. I mean, like, there's people like us who still, like, love the old Resident Evil games. But then, I mean, a lot of people have converted into this action thing now with Resident Evil, with it being like Gears of War. I mean, they probably just think that if they make a game like that, it'll satisfy most people and it'll sell more. There's no reason to spend extra money to satisfy people like us, because we'll end up playing the Resident Evil games anyway, just because they're Resident Evils.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. The problem with action games is the market is so saturated right now that they're really... There's going to be a developer that gets smart and comes along. I mean, Dead Space is moderately successful with this idea. It's pretty close to being a survival horror. It's, you know, definitely closer to it than a Resident Evil game. But the market's so saturated with action games right now, people are going to get bored of it. You can only run around shooting things so many times without any thinking, logic. I mean, I'd like to say that if somebody creates a good, true survival horror game, it's going to capture a key demographic that really has no other alternative than one game every 2 or 3 years coming out, or, you know, like Trent said, indie games, which don't give you the same epic scale that a AAA survival horror game would. I mean, it's kind of sad. The best... I mean, not necessarily a survival horror game, but the scariest game I've played recently was Slender. Even though that's like a free game you download, I haven't been kind of that tense while playing a game for, you know, a good few years now.
I'm just happy to see that there are people who agree with my opinion about the more recent releases in the series, because up until now, the majority of the people I either talk with or I chat with online seem to strongly disagree with my opinion, because I kind of lean towards the old school Resident Evil games, just like you guys. I thought that nobody else agreed with me, but I'm glad to see that all of you share the same frustrations as I do. You pretty much covered every single thing I was going to talk about, so except for the one thing that I thought that they should have introduced as an optional thing to the game was the fixed camera. Now, I know that they did it back on the PS1 days due to hardware limitations, and it was like kind of a workaround, but to me the fixed cameras was something that it was a part of Resident Evil that you just can't live without. And I know that Resident Evil 4 was groundbreaking for its time, and I was amazed every single minute I played through that game. But just like Josh said, it kind of was a stepping stone for the ruin of the Resident Evil series after that. So I hope that they reintroduce the fixed camera option, just like in other games where you could press select to switch between different camera modes. That would be great.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that the DLC for Resident Evil 5,
Yeah, I
Lost
was just about to
Nightmares.
cover that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, basically that had a fixed camera option that you could choose, like once you beat the game, and you know that it really felt like a classic Resident Evil. Like the area you're in feels a lot like the mansion in Resident Evil 1. It's actually pretty much is kind of a replica of it, since it's like Spencer's estate. And I mean, that was a great DLC pack. The only problem is it was only about an hour long. Like if they were to release a full-length game like that DLC, you know, I think it would be amazing.
Yeah, to me, I mean, that's what's so upsetting. I think Lost in Nightmares proves that Capcom still has the wherewithal to produce a proper survival horror game. Someone there at Capcom still understands, you know, what makes a proper survival horror game, and you know that Lost in Nightmares obviously fits seamlessly into the kind of gameplay setup, you know, control setup and everything that modern Resident Evil games have, and it's just kind of disappointing to see this hour-long, almost, you know, this hour-long snippet of what should be Resident Evil, and you know, then it ends, and you're just kind of like left going back to shooting hundreds of, you know, shitty enemies.
I had more fun with that than the actual. I didn't really like Resident Evil 5.
Yeah, I agree. If Wesker was in Resident Evil 5, even though his character kind of changed a lot in it, I just found him hilarious in it at the same time. I don't know. He kind of carried Resident Evil 5 for me. The environments did, the graphics did at the time, and the fact if you're playing with a friend, it's a lot of fun. I played through the game a little bit by myself, not nearly as much fun, but at that point, I was pretty much like farming for achievements and money. But I mean, what would you say makes a good survival horror game? What is it that Capcom can't seem to? I mean, Capcom, Konami, all these other games. Silent Hill has also kind of gone down the hill since really Silent Hill 2, I'd say. Some people like Silent Hill 3 and 4, but what would you say makes a good survival horror game that these developers can't seem to grasp anymore?
I would say it's atmosphere. Like a lot of the new generation survival horror games just throw like countless enemies at you one after another, where, you know, over the course of the game you'll kill like 300-400 enemies. Well, the classic survival horrors, sort of like Abdul was saying, were, you know, the characters were a lot more vulnerable in those, so you actually felt like you could die, where, you know, one enemy has the potential to kill you pretty easily. Like if you just go with a you know, a very solid atmosphere where you don't have like constant enemies, but when you do fight an enemy, they're able to kill you very easily. It makes it a lot scarier that way.
Not only that, I think you know, combined with atmosphere is pacing, and I think that's really what has kind of upset me about the modern Resident Evil games as well. To me, if you know, if you're expecting to walk into a room and have to fight a dozen enemies, there's no sense of it's not intense. There's no sense of dread. You don't build anything. And when you play, you know, the older Resident Evil games, you'll have these stretches where you go through, you're working on solving puzzles or doing something, and you know, every time you open a door, you're like, all right, you know, what's going to be in this room? What's going to be in this room? Maybe nothing. Maybe 2 zombies. Maybe a hunter. You know, maybe something even worse. And I mean, playing through like Resident Evil 5 and 6, I mean, you know, when you open up a door, you go into a room, there's going to be something to kill. You take everything out, then there are no surprises, and you kind of move on to the next area and repeat the same process all over again.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're basically walking around with barely any ammo, like say you have 5 bullets in your gun, your character's about to die in like a classic survival horror game, you're opening the door, you have no idea what to expect, you're thinking, you know, hopefully there's some healing items or some ammo behind the door, and you know, if you encounter an enemy, you're pretty much dead. Well, in the newer games, you know there's going to be an enemy there, you know there's going to be ammo, you know there's going to be healing items. You know, it just sort of dumbs it down.
I'm sorry. I'm not a big
ahead,
fan of these high IQ enemies that were introduced since Resident Evil 5. Like when you walk into a room and you look at them, they have this tactical thing going on. They're very well organized. They take turns shooting at you, ducking, hiding behind a wall or something. And I remember I just I put the gamepad down and I watched how they were like arranging all their tactical aspects of the fight. Just like I put the gamepad down and I continued watching them, and I remember I was very disappointed. Like, this is not Resident Evil, at least not for me. I understand that evolution for both the zombies, the story, and even the gameplay is required, but the direction it went to was not what I hoped for.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree entirely on that. As far as, you know, monsters getting smarter, I think that kind of started happening really in Code Veronica. Once people were able to start controlling the virus they had, it made the game a lot less scary because you're fighting more of a human enemy. You're not fighting, you know, let's use Birkin, for example, from Resident Evil 2. The guy was a product of his own demise. You know, he had the choice of taking the virus, turning into an uncontrollable killing machine, and going after his own family even, versus you take someone from Resident Evil 5. What was that little guy's name?
Irving?
Irving, yeah. Yeah, someone like Irving who just uses the virus as like, you know, oh crap, I'm cornered now, I better use the virus, and I'm going to turn into this giant talking Leviathan that still has a weird high-pitched voice, and I don't know, it's stupid when they have control over the virus. It makes the game way less scary for me than when they're just an instinct, more or less.
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely with that. One thing that game developers don't seem to get these days is that guns aren't scary. Guns, like, have no place in a Resident Evil game. I mean, if the main character should be using guns, but none of the enemies should be just shooting at you. It's just not scary that way. It's much more scary when they're, you know, not really human enemies, or they're not really able to think straight, and they're, you know, just much more feral, I guess, where they just try and kill you.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. As soon as I saw that Dead Space 3 was going to have, human combatants and a cover-based shooting system and stuff, I pretty much wrote that game off. I mean, that's just a complete turn off.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens with Dead Space when we play it. I don't want to judge it too early. We'll be reviewing that one as well pretty soon after its launch. We're going to plug our website right now. Nathan and I are actually going to be doing a cooperative review on that for the first time. We're actually going to play through it together and give a two-man review. That should be interesting.
Yeah.
But I'd like to also note again on the atmosphere, more so than the pacing. One thing that always made Resident Evil stand out, you know, over like I like Silent Hill 2 a lot. I like the Silent Hill games, but was the art direction. You know, how it always had that. The environments felt very lived in. Great art direction in the old games. Everything was very ornate. It was kind of surreal. You know, the police station used to be an old art museum. Everything was very interesting to look at, and I always liked the music. As well as the sound effects in the game created a very heavy atmosphere. I mean, now it looks like crap when you go back and look at that pixelated stuff. Back when you had to use your imagination a little bit in video games, I miss a lot of that. I wish they would kind of bring that back. As far as the fixed camera angles, I mean, while I like them to some degree, I think it should be something like Lost in Nightmares, where you have the option to turn it on or turn it off. I'd like to play through the game both ways, because I think you can have a behind-the-shoulder experience as long as you know how to build atmosphere in that game and still do it, while the fixed camera angles definitely allow the developers of the game more creative control on what you're going to see. And, you know, when you have a camera angle looking at you through a window, when you're like standing in a hallway, it creates this very claustrophobic feeling when you don't know what is directly in front of you, and I think that's a huge part of the horror element that games are missing nowadays.
I think Resident Evil 6 tried to do that a few times. Like, they would randomly switch it to a fixed camera angle, so you'd be like walking around.
Yeah, they did have a
Wouldn't be
couple
over the shoulder.
times when they did it, yeah. Like, it wouldn't matter, it'd be like climbing staircases or something, there'd be like no enemies.
Yeah, it didn't really work.
Just a very good example of the use of fixed camera angles to scare you, even though it's a different game. Since you mentioned Silent Hill a few times, me and Nathan were playing through Silent Hill 4 The Room. We were at the hospital, and we walk into this room, and you just see that all of a sudden you see this huge face of that girl. I really forgot her name, and she looks like she was going through a seizure or something. That was a priceless moment, really scary, and that's something that we don't come across a lot anymore.
Yeah, it was just kind of psychological. It was just so random. You open the door and you just like see her face filling like the other side of the room, and she's all like cross-eyed and twitching and everything. It's kind of weird. But you don't see it at first. Like, you just see your character when you open the room, and then once the fixed camera changes, it just, you know, pops up right in your face.
Yeah, exactly. It was a nice scare.
Yeah, because I think you don't really have control. It makes you feel like you have less control when there's fixed camera angle. Like, you can't really see around the corner or something, so maybe it's a little scary, a little more scary.
Well, not only that too, but I mean, it empowers the people designing the game to make sure that you see exactly what they want you to see. I know, like games like Dead Space, for instance, you know, you could walk around a hall, you know, walk in a hallway, and if you're not really looking at something specific, you can miss things that the developers put in place to try and, you know, really unnerve you. And, you know, it's being completely optional or completely random depending on, you know, your play style and what you look at. You know, fixed camera angles definitely solve that and empower designers to really create a really tense atmosphere.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more on that. I mean, watching somebody, I've watched several people play through survival horror games, including people on this channel. Watching someone play through like a different way than I'm used to playing, I always look around. I appreciate like art direction and stuff. If there's a window in Dead Space, I'm gonna look out the window, which is kind of how the developers intend you to do it. I know people don't do that. I mean, Justin, for example, likes to run around playing it like it's a fighting game, almost. He just runs around pushing and stomping on things. It's almost like comical watching Justin play Dead Space. But how you play the game definitely kind of affects your the horror element of it. Or I'll see someone like, there's a train flying by the window, it's on fire, and, you know, they're looking at a wall trying to see if they can pick up a box while I know what's happening because I played through the game, and I'm like, you need to turn around and look, and I'm just getting like frustrated watching it.
Oh yeah, that reminds me, I was playing Batman Arkham City with my brother. He introduced me to the game, so I picked up the controller and I started the very first sequence, and I think it was a part that involved either the Joker or Harley Quinn, I don't remember, but I was looking around and controlling the camera in these random angles, and my brother was yelling at me. He's like, "What the hell are you doing? You just missed like 2 great sequences and you had no idea what was happening on the screen." So yeah, like you said, with fixed camera angles, the developer does
or the developer tries to guide your attention to the developer tries to guide your attention to like a shotgun or a grenade launcher, and somehow you still miss it.
Oh man, well that reminds me of
in the background and just walk past, leave like 150 handgun bullets. You know, it's just, the red boxes. Just
yeah, the stuff that doesn't blend in perfectly with the background.
How long did we spend on that Tyrant Nomad? The Tyrant and the helicopter scene in Code Veronica?
It took me like a week. Like, you had nothing. Like, all you had was a knife. I think you had like 3 regular bowgun bolts, not like the explosive bowgun bolt, and just a knife. And I had to do both Tyrant sequences, like the one where he just keeps pushing you back into the fire, where he's like walking towards you. That one was harder than the helicopter sequence. Because the helicopter one, you could just hit him with the like crates to push him out. But that sequence, he would just like, you know, keep pushing you back towards the fire, and fighting him with a knife was really frustrating.
Why didn't you just restart the game for like 2 hours?
Yeah, probably should have, but I ended up
taking like 2 hours.
Did we have any other savings at the time? I don't remember.
I think it was just one save file, but
yeah.
You can run through that game in like 3 hours, so it's not too bad.
Yeah, it's true, but I mean, he never picked up the grenade launcher. He didn't pick up like any of the explosive bowgun bolts, and he like missed tons of handgun ammo and like all that.
See, Justin, I could relate to you.
Oh, Justin.
Your
Yeah.
experience.
Justin found
Justin
everything. He beat all the game.
Yeah, Justin displays it like Tekken. Just goes around like punching everything and shooting every body on the ground so nothing can potentially scare him. He walks into a room and just dismembers every body.
Dude, that's how they made the
okay,
games.
okay.
Dude, like the monsters even drop bullets for you. That's like even more incentive to just.
Yeah,
run
you're
around
not
killing
supposed to like come in and just before something can jump up and grab you. You always just stomp every single thing you see first.
Yeah, I don't understand how they drop bullets and money, even in other games. Like, why were they carrying these items to begin with?
That's what they had on them when they got turned into a monster. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, I agree. It's scarier and probably better if they didn't drop items.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely.
sure, there's incentive to kill them that way, but I think it would be better to just, you know, try and conserve your ammo and run from enemies opposed to trying to kill everything. If you go out of your way to kill every enemy, you'll have no ammo. You know.
You know, I think that's like one of the reasons that Amnesia was so effective as a horror game. I mean, you're completely unarmed. You know, you have no option to really fight. It's just survive.
I never got it. I just can't get into Amnesia. I think I got into it too late. It's kind of a game I've thought about going back and playing, but it just looked terrible to me when I first started playing, and I couldn't get into it.
Yeah, I've heard good things about it, but it's kind of the same thing with me. I've never like really been able to get into it.
I was just getting pissed
I know
off
people
that
really
part
love
where you're in
that
the
game,
basement. When you're in the basement and the water in the crates is like right at the beginning of the game, I had to like, you know what I'm talking about? You gotta jump from crate to crate. If you fall in the water, you start taking damage. That just annoyed me. Jumping around in a first-person perspective always annoys me.
You know, in another game too, that a modern game actually that we should mention as far as at least creating great atmosphere and having specific sections that were good as far as survival horror is concerned, was Metro 2033. Game had an incredible atmosphere, particularly once you're out of the tunnels. And also, there's a section with enemies called librarians that are particularly effective as like a survival horror type enemy.
I've still yet to play that. I know you gifted me that on Steam, but just haven't had the time to go through it yet. But I mean, I've heard nothing but good things from it.
Yeah, my computer couldn't run it when it first came out, so...
I mean, it has its shortcomings, don't get me wrong, and the game as a whole is not a survival horror game, but, you know, I played that right before Resident Evil 6, and I think that, you know, those standout survival horror sections really made Resident Evil 6 just that much more disappointing to me, that, you know, some game developed in, I think is either the Ukraine or Russia, basically it was a better survival horror game than, you know, a numbered Resident Evil game.
Yeah.
Metro 2033 definitely had a great atmosphere. The graphics were also amazing for its time, and just living in the underground, in the tunnels and the subway paths, that was something I wasn't very familiar with in other games as a setting in general. I thought it was a great game, but the combat system in particular I thought was a bit lacking, just my personal opinion, but overall it was a great game. I do agree, and I'm looking forward to the new one that's coming out soon.
When's that one coming out? Did they move it back?
I think it was originally March, but I think they changed.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty soon from now, but I heard it got moved back.
Yeah, since THQ went bankrupt and they sold the
Yeah.
game among others, I'm not sure what the new company's gonna do with it, but they did announce on their Facebook page that it is in fact coming out. No changes.
Well, the
are gonna
game's-
happen, but
The game's
we don't know
basically
about the thing.
finished.
Yeah.
Alright, without moving too far away from the topic, I mean, because we could easily start going into THQ's bankruptcy now.
I have a question. I never talked about
Go ahead.
Resident Evil 6, so are you
That's what
gonna
I was going to
introduce
talk
that?
about next. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay.
I wanted to cover what specifically bothered you about Resident Evil 6. Where did it, you know, a lot of people can criticize it, but it did do some things well. What did it do well?
The things that did well were particularly Leon and Ada's campaigns for me. Like the part...
Minus the last chapters.
Yeah, minus the last chapters, but I mean early on where you're in Tall Oaks, I think it's called, It reminded me a lot of Raccoon City. It seemed a lot like Resident Evil 2. Some of the parts in Leon's campaign were actually kind of scary, like when you're in the subway and it's all dark and you have zombies, like actual, T-virus zombies, not like the new type, just jumping at you. The part where you're in the graveyard and all that. Those were really well done. But later in the game, it just turned more into an action-style game. Particularly the final boss of both those campaigns was just kind of boring for me.
Oh god, it was the worst boss I've seen in history.
I think it's superior to 5.
Do it over and over again. What was that?
It's I think it's superior to 5 as far as gameplay.
I
just didn't like the enemy. I didn't like Simmons.
Yeah, he was terrible.
Colonel Sanders.
Yeah, Colonel Sanders and his chicken virus.
And every enemy had a machine.
I will say pretty much the second chapter of almost everyone's campaign was by far the strongest. And to me, like,
yeah,
by the time I hit like the second chapter of everyone's campaign, I was feeling okay about Resident Evil 6 for at least just a little bit before going back to being utterly crushed and disappointed.
It was weird how that worked. The second chapter of everyone's campaign seemed like it was the best one almost. I know Abdul would disagree with that because I believe the second chapter of Chris's was the bridge. Am I correct?
Yes, I was just going to talk about the bridge. As far as Chris campaigns go, when I was playing through Europe, the first part of Europe was fine. When we went up the bridge, I just felt that the game just lost its identity at that point. I felt like I was playing a bad clone of Gears of War. I was constantly questioning myself, why am I still playing this game when I was in that specific chapter? It got a little bit better later on, but to me, Chris's campaign was a complete disaster. As for Leon's campaign, I thought it was a first step in the right direction in a long time. I was somewhat satisfied with the campaign, with the exception of Simmons, obviously. The problem I had with Simmons, other than his motives and just his character in general, I did not like the character design and his persistence. It reminded me of this guy from Final Fantasy X, the boss, I forgot his name, Seymour Guado. He's just as persistent as him. He would constantly come back, and when you're sick of him and it's over and you thought you could look at what's coming next, he always comes back in the most annoying ways possible. I know Capcom were trying to make it as if it's because he's the last boss and it's supposed to be like an epic sequence of battles, but I think in execution it was not as good as it was in theory. And the fact that Simmons' final form was one giant fly, to me that was a big fail in
the problem with
design.
Simmons was every fight with him was so freaking repetitive and easy, even on professional difficulty. I played through it with Nathan. The only kind of cool one, but it was cool, but it was still kind of boring after you did it for about a minute, because he was pretty much a bullet sponge. The first time you fight him when you're on the train and he's running across the tracks, that was kind of cool. Just how it kind of took different stages and stuff, but he's so easy to dodge, and you get no idea if you're really doing damage to him or not. The T-Rex fight was just absolutely terrible with him, and then you fight the lion form or whatever it is again. The fly form I felt was a bit stronger because you could tell when you were doing damage it had a bit of strategy to it. I actually thought maybe that was actually his best incarnation. But the problem is you fight him in Leon's campaign, he's extremely boring in him, and then you fight him again in Ada's campaign and it's pretty much the same thing, and it's like, Christ, I gotta do this again.
That's pretty much a problem with the entire game, really, as far as like overlapping portions. It's great in theory to have all these characters intersect, but the fact that they intersect and you do exactly
they didn't do it correctly.
Thing. Yeah, you're supposed to see the same the same event from another perspective and have a different role in fulfilling what happens within that sequence, but you do the exact same damn thing.
Every once in a while they did it correctly, like a lot of Ada's sequences where she's like giving sniper cover to the chainsaw guy for Jake and Sherry. But then they do it again where the part where you're fighting the giant in Europe. they could have devised that into a way that one person goes around setting up the satellites or whatever you're doing for that one, and the other person fights the giant, or the two giants actually. Instead, you can do both times, making it pointless, and you just have to do the same boss twice, and it's the exact same both ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely repetitive with fights like Simmons. I mean, you do... First of all, the fights are like half an hour when you're fighting him as Leon, and like you said, he doesn't really react to when you're attacking him. You can't really tell if you're doing damage. It's just, you know, he shifts to human form, you knife him a couple times, and he shifts to his T-Rex or his lion form or whatever, and he just keeps shifting back and forth. You can't really tell, you know, how far you've progressed through it, which is kind of a big pain. And in terms of repetition, I know Trent mentioned this before, but in like every campaign, you have to like find three keys with like the regenerate. And it's like the same thing over and over again.
It's cool like the first
same
two
areas,
times, but it's like, come on.
Yeah, it's in like every campaign.
I like the regenerators at first, but eventually you get to a point we had like grenade launchers and stuff, and they're not even, you know, they're pretty much just consuming our ammo, but it doesn't matter, we're going to get it in the next room anyways. And they usually stock those areas full of ammo. I felt also, I mean, the main antagonist might have actually been Carla. I believe that was in the Ada clone, and how that was supposed to be a twist when every single time it like shows her like changing from red to blue. Like, I don't know, I caught that the first time it showed it. I hate obvious twists like that, and I don't know, she was kind of a cool boss fight actually, that when she mutates and you kind of go through her deal with Ada, where she kind of takes over the ship.
Yeah, like I believe Ada's campaign was probably the strongest out of all the campaigns in the game, personally.
I felt Jake and Cherry's was the strongest overall. I felt the first 4 chapters of Leon and Ada were both stronger than Jake and Cherry and Chris's campaign, but the last chapter, both of them were so boring, and I mean, they were negative points to the experiences before, because I just wanted them to be over. Jake and Cherry, I pretty much enjoyed all the chapters, maybe not as much as the first 4 of the other 2, but overall I felt it was a stronger campaign. Then I cared a little bit more about the story, it was more interesting to me.
See, I thought Jake and Cherry's campaign was tremendously disappointing, just because of the real design failure with the Ustanak. Because to me, my problem with the Ustanak is, you know, he's supposed to be like Nemesis or Tyrant or Mr. X from Scenario B in Resident Evil 2, but you know every time, you know, when he's going to show up. You walk into a room, it's full of red barrels, it's, you know, large, it's open, it's like, okay, Ustanak's going to show up. Or it's like, you know, the game like introduces you to the Ustanak with like a cutscene, and you have to like run. It's like Crash Bandicoot, you know, those levels where you're running from a damn boulder.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely horrible. It's a complete design disaster. I mean, you're supposed... I don't understand how they failed so hard.
I still felt he was the strongest antagonist for any of the campaigns, though. I mean, he was definitely a huge failure of what I was expecting him to be. But I mean, he was the most like a Resident Evil, you know, bad guy. He didn't talk and shapeshift and all this crap.
I agree. It was just, you know... That design failure to me was so blatant and so easily avoided that it just really ruined it for me.
Yeah, the Crash Bandicoot levels were so friggin'. I don't know the point of that.
Running from the boulder.
Hey, Crash Bandicoot was a great game for its time, okay?
Not a great survival horror game.
Well, yeah, of course. I wanted to say something about monster design, not just the fly form of Simmons, but I thought the spider monsters and the grasshopper monsters, or locust, or whatever you want to call them, I did not like those at all. I was not convinced by them. You mean like the half
Chinese guy, half spider crab people thing?
Yeah, like those at the beginning of the Chris campaign who kidnapped those VIPs, and they just started climbing the wall with their spider legs. I don't know. I just did not like those monsters.
I actually found it kind of funny, but you know, I didn't really find them scary at all. They were like a unique enemy. They're kind of funny, but yeah.
I mean, Nathan and I played through the game together. If you played through the game together, it is enjoyable. I don't know who else played through, or was someone else who played by themselves.
Yeah, I played through the campaign with my brother. Yeah, I did the campaign with my brother. It's much more fun when done in pairs. I agree.
For the most part, and this shouldn't be the way in Resident Evil games, we're laughing at monsters. We're laughing at cutscenes where you die, especially when you're getting pushed into the grinder. Nathan and I probably killed each other 10 times on that part where the regenerator pushes me into the fan or him into the fan. For some reason, that stuff never gets old to us.
Yeah, but on a more serious note, that specific scene with the regenerator and that machine where you make minced meat. The very first time I died, I was in complete shock. It was just the amount of gore and the surprise in it. I did not expect it at all. It was one of the highlights of the game.
Yeah, it's a lot like Dead Space. Like, whenever you die in Dead Space, you feel like shit because you just watch Isaac just get ripped apart in like the most brutal ways possible. That's what it reminded me of when the regenerator just like pushes you down the sink.
Those are amazing.
Josh and I play the yeah, when Josh and I play the Resident Evil games, we just like do that on purpose. Like I remember in Resident Evil 5, I just wouldn't shoot Wesker just so Wesker would do like the backflip and like break Josh's neck every single time. And it was the same thing in Resident Evil 6. Like whenever there was like, you know, a stupid quick time event where I'm supposed to help him, I just wouldn't help him, and I just like watched him die in like the dumbest ways. Like, you know, one was the regenerator going down the sink. Another one was you wake up on like the boat at the end, and there's like one of those guys with the knife. He's just about to stab Josh, and I just wouldn't shoot him.
Okay, let's talk about the waggling in the game. Before I forget, the waggling in the game. My God. That is the worst QuickTime event thing. You know, it's similar to Mario Party 1, the tug-of-war thing that destroys your palm if you get really competitive at that. I cannot think of a worse QuickTime event than randomly making you waggle the joystick back and forth and pretty much break your controller on the professional difficulty and stuff. It made you waggle so freaking hard it was annoying.
I'm pretty sure Microsoft and Sony subsidized Capcom to put those waggling sections in so you break your controller and have to buy a new one.
Oh my God. I swear to God, they better not put it. You know it was coming up too, and you still wouldn't be ready. You know, I gotta waggle my joystick back and forth for this QuickTime event. All the button ones, the button cues, I was fine on just waggling. Then I'd have to like change the way I held the controller every time.
Yeah, I don't know why they put so many. Why did they do? I mean, the Krauser and Leon QuickTime event was cool in Resident Evil 4, but this is just like way too. It's like on everything. Like you open a door, you have to like spin the controller around just to like turn it.
Yeah, I mean, it's this terrible thing where, unfortunately, I don't think Capcom wants to make Resident Evil far more cinematic. To me, like, Resident Evil 6 reminds me a little more of Uncharted than Gears of War. You know, minus Chris's campaign, of course, in terms of wanting to present. But, you know, in terms of wanting to present this really big, you know, visually intense cinematic experience, and for some reason they're fixated on QuickTime events as a way to load the game with a bunch of you know, cinematic events, but give you some sort of control. And it's a cop out. It's a design cop out.
And I mean, how many times did Leon get in a vehicular accident of some sort? I mean, like that guy has got to have the most insane insurance rates.
Evil Knievel.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem with the newer Resident Evil games is you're just playing as superheroes. You know, Chris, Leon, Jake, they can't die. Like, part of the, like, a fundamental fact of of what makes a good survival horror game is when the protagonist is vulnerable. You feel like you can die. You know, you get hit twice, you die. Whereas in the new Resident Evil games, you just feel invincible. You know, you go through plane crashes, you go through car crashes, you get shot a million times. It's just not scary when you're playing as Superman the entire time.
Yeah, you know, and part of that too, I think, is the lack of mystery in Resident Evil games anymore. You know, your characters are all seasoned. You know, they've all have like 10 million zombie kill notches in their belts, and there's no mystery as to what's going on. I really miss, you know, the kind of setup where, you know, in the early Resident Evil games where it's like you wake up and the world's gone to shit and you need to find a way to survive. There's a certain intimacy, too, of being a character who's stuck in a situation where they don't really know nor understand what's going on, and they're just trying to find a way out. And this kind of, and Josh mentioned it before, the global scale of Resident Evil is really undermining that element.
Yeah, now it's just like a group of Marines, more or less, going in. Come on, let's go take them out, boys. And they just hop out of a helicopter and start blowing away zombies. And it's not nearly as scary as everything around me's getting effed, and I need to figure out a way to get out of here alive. You know, you gotta find things instead of I came in with 6 rocket launchers, a tank, and a assault rifle. Let's see what you can throw at me.
It'd be a lot better if you just played as like a random guy. You know, you don't play as Leon or Chris. You just play as a new character who's, you know, not some super soldier. He's just, you know, some random guy who has no idea what's going on and, you know, has to survive.
If they put Resident Evil 6 Leon into Resident Evil 2, he would have just stayed in the cop car when the gasoline truck was coming in. He would have just blown up with the car and just walked out of the fire and been like, you know, what next? Like, kick down the brick wall, walk through the precinct, and it would have been over.
Yeah, you just, like, roundhouse kick Tyrant a couple times, and that would be it.
Yeah, what's Tyrant compared to these, like, 900-foot tall monsters that you're fighting all the time? You know, he's only some, like, 7.5-foot tall Reuter, you know?
Now, there's one more thing I would like to add. It's definitely a minor issue, but it was still there, and I suffered from it quite a few times. At least until I stopped playing the game, and it went through like 2 updates, but it wasn't fixed, was 2 things. The first being the fact that you can't pause the game for 75% of the time. I have no idea why. Only very specific scenes where you could pause the game, but for the majority you could not. And the second problem was during cutscenes, the zombies or monsters would continue to attack the main character, and by the time you get back from the cutscene, you're already half dead. And in many times I faced a game over because of that. I don't know, did anyone else have that problem? Yes.
No, I don't remember that.
I've never known.
I played it on the PlayStation 3, and I did do all the updates until the time I quit the game, so I'm surprised I'm the only one who faced that. It was very annoying.
We played it on 360. Might have been, I don't know.
I think all of us played it on Xbox. I think you're the only one who played it on PlayStation 3. I don't know if it's specific to the console, but you know, I don't remember that happening at all.
I have too many bullets for anything to survive long enough to see a cutscene.
You should have played on. First of all, let's cover the difficulty of Resident Evil 6 while we're on this. I felt it was way too freaking easy. Even on professional difficulty, Nathan and I plowed through the game. It wasn't very challenging at all, which for, you know, we were talking about Resident Evil 1 Remake earlier. I think that's a good game. It's a good challenge. It's a game you can get to a point you might be screwed and actually have to restart the game if you don't play it well. It was just such an easy game, even on the hardest difficulty. I don't know why they did that.
It was so easy. I could beat half the game just suplexing people, just like breaking their neck.
Oh yeah, you didn't even need guns.
Yeah, the melee is way overpowered.
Yeah, you're gonna run around beating the shit out of everything. It doesn't matter. I mean, that's how you kill the Ustanak. You run around and punch him and boxes at him while you punch him. I mean, it's... I don't know, it's stupid. It's not a whole lot to say with that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It was way too easy, and like Trent said, you always have way too much ammo throughout the game. You have so much ammo that your inventory is always full. You can't even like pick up more ammo.
Oh, the inventory system was terrible.
You're just running around with like 300 bullets all the time, and that should never happen in a Resident Evil game. Like, you play Resident Evil 1, you try and avoid like every single zombie in the game. I doubt there's like even one point in that game where you'll ever have 300 bullets.
Yeah, it's the inventory was messed up. They took out the merchant that I kind of liked from Resident Evil 4, and Resident Evil 5 didn't have him, but it still had a store where you could buy and upgrade things. I miss that. I don't like the little skill point upgrades. Every time you made a purchase, you couldn't really feel a difference. It took like a culmination of the 3. It was so half-assed and just pointless. You got like 3 you liked, or 4 or 5 that you'd switch between, depending on what campaign you're playing, and then, you know, the rest of them are just buying them for the heck of it.
I didn't even use them. You just can't. I mean, like, your melee punch does like 200% damage, and then you upgrade it, does 10% more. You can't really tell. You're just gonna suplex them and like smash their head anyway.
And there's times where Nathan and I were just like beating the crap out of like hordes of zombies. The two of us would just like pass them around.
Yeah, it's like that awful fight with Nemesis and Resident Evil Apocalypse, whatever the hell that garbage
Oh my
movie
god,
was.
we're not gonna bring up the Resident Evil movies. It'll
Thou
extend this
shalt
to
not
like
mention
another
the
2
movies.
hours. No, they're too terrible to even mention.
I mean, Nemesis crying, for God's sake.
Yeah, and he got beat up by a 110-pound girl. But I mean, one things I mean, that's kind of how we feel about Resident Evil 6. I started with what do you like about Resident Evil 6, and about after 2 sentences, we got into a tirade about what we didn't like about it. So let's go back to what we actually liked about it. I liked the fact that it was pretty lengthy compared to Resident Evil game. Most Resident Evil games are anywhere between 6 and 12 hours, I'd say, depending on how you play them. Most of them can be rushed through in 2, but you know, as a co-op campaign, I felt I got my money's worth. The Mercenaries wasn't nearly as good as 5 or 4, so I didn't get that, but I did enjoy it, and we played through it completely 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, I mean, it does have a lot of gameplay.
Good enemy variety too.
Yeah, it has a lot of enemies. It has, you know, a decent amount of co-op gameplay. It's probably the longest Resident Evil overall, but yeah, I guess that's the positives for it. I mean, it's fun playing if you're playing through it with a friend. If you're playing through it by yourself, I wouldn't recommend even playing it at all.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can't say anything about it that's other than the length of the game that's overall positive. Like, but I will say that there are specific sequences within the game that I did really enjoy and did really gave me, you know, kind of renewed my drive to finish the game. Particularly, I like the sequence where Jake and Sherry are captured. I thought that was a nice little change up in the gameplay formula. Of course, Chapter 2 with Leon going through the church, having the puzzle sequences, because I really miss puzzles in Resident Evil.
And then Ada's was even better when she went through the church and had her puzzles.
Yeah, and you know, those moments really kind of drew me back in. I will say that, you know, despite the fact that on the whole the game is massively disappointing from a design standpoint, there are certain sequences which are really enjoyable.
It's like if they found a way to take the maybe 10 hours out of a 20-some hour game that were enjoyable and put that into a solid 10-hour game, it might have been pretty good if they could have connected it and made it, you know, coherent to some degree. Justin, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just like how the game was. I felt like it was really comprehensive. Like they gave you whole new characters. Like they let you use like Sherry and Jake, and they gave you like a bunch of new stuff. But the problem is, I think they try to add so much new stuff that they didn't polish it well. So I don't know, just like the game mechanics, they added a lot of stuff. Like I don't know, I can't think of any of the new features off the top of my head. But it just doesn't work well. It just makes you feel really overpowered. The fact that you can
the cover
punch
system and stuff.
Yeah, you can punch without even like getting near them now or stunning them. You can just like go up to them and like break their neck.
I feel with, you know, whenever Resident Evil 7 comes around, that anything that happened in this game could be completely removed. It had a lot of stuff happen, but it doesn't feel like any of it was consequential to any degree. Nothing really got resolved. It was all completely self-contained. Villains and conflicts that appeared in this game were resolved in this game, and there was no real new relationships found except for maybe Sherry and Jake that might have any impact on the future.
Yeah, here's kind of a spoiler, so if you haven't played through Resident Evil 6,
we've already
don't listen to what I have to... Yeah, but don't listen to what I have to say here. One thing that really pissed me off with the ending of Ada's campaign is they leave nothing open for a sequel. Like, it shows, you know, Simmons' ultimate creation or whatever hatching from an egg, and she just shoots it.
Carlos.
You don't even see what's coming out of there. Or, yeah, Carlos. And she just, like, you know, blows up the entire lab, shoots whatever's coming out of the egg, and you don't even see, you know, what that is. They could have left it open for a sequel. It could have been like a Wesker clone or, you know, something.
Yeah, that's what we were hoping.
But everything's resolved.
We're still hoping Wesker's not dead to give some sort of persistency to the story if they continue to do it and not reboot it. So, Abdul, what good things did you notice about Resident Evil 6?
Now, for me, I really appreciated Capcom's attempt to appeal to both the old school Resident Evil fans who liked the survival horror aspect of the series. Yeah. And
It was an attempt.
yeah, it was just an attempt. Yeah. maybe not the most successful, but I do appreciate that. And at the same time, they were trying to appeal to the, I guess, the wider audience who like the action aspect of all the AAA titles that they have these days. So, although to me it ended up becoming more of an identity crisis for the game, I do appreciate the Capcom's attempt, I guess. As for the game itself, what I liked the most was at the very end of Leon's campaign. I believe it was just before the part where you fight the T-Rex, I think. There was this very narrow hallway. You get this claustrophobic feeling, and you're walking through it, and all of a sudden, like 30 zombies appear, and they start rushing on you. I remember both me and my brother were panicking at that point. It was for me, it was the greatest part of Resident Evil 6.
I don't know if we're going to do a review of Resident Evil 6 in the future. That's kind of why we discussed it. I don't know if I'd be able to contain it to a reasonable amount of time, because we could clearly continue this conversation. What would you give Resident Evil out of 10? Resident Evil 6 out of 10? Just going down the list. Trent?
I'd give it a 5. As a Resident Evil game, it's terrible. As an action game, it's pretty solid to mediocre. So I think 5 is pretty appropriate.
Justin?
I'd give it a 7.5. A 5 or 4.5 or 5. That area is a little bit too low for the. I mean, if you look at other games that get like a 4.5 or a 5, it's like it's nowhere near that. I just think it's compared to Resident Evil 4 and the other Resident Evil, I just think it doesn't live up.
That was.
What the hell was that?
Someone's dog just chimed in.
Abdul, what would you give it? That's staying in the final edit.
I would give it a 7. I think it was overall a decent to good game if you take out the Resident Evil name out of it. So just because we had so much high expectation for the game, I think, and the fact that we were disappointed, I think that's not fair when giving the game a final score. But when you just compare the game to, other games of this generation, I think it deserves a 7.
Nathan?
Yeah, I agree with Abdul and Justin on that fact. I mean, if you take it as a standalone title, compare it to, other third-person action games that are out there, it's a fun multiplayer experience. So, I mean, if you think of it that way, I'd say it's probably around a 7. I'd probably give it a 7.2. But if you think of it as a Resident Evil title, and you compare it to, Resident Evil 4 and the past Resident Evils, that raises your expectations a ton. And as a Resident Evil title, I would rate it lower. But as a standalone game, I'll go with 7.2.
Yeah, I agree. I'd have to kind of give it 2 different ratings and average them out. One for a Resident Evil game, it'd be in the 6 range. Not the worst Resident Evil, definitely not the best. Certainly playable with a friend. It's a fun game, but it has plenty of shortcomings. As a third-person shooter game, I'd put it up there with the Gears of War series. It'd probably be in the 8 range. I feel that series for the most part is overrated. The third one I did enjoy. I like that one far more than the first 2, but it'd probably be a high 7, low 8 for me. So what are you hoping for Resident Evil in the future, and what do you think is actually going to happen to Resident Evil in the future, going forward with 7 or whatever they're going to be doing next? Trent?
I think I kind of already said, what I hope as far as, I'm under no delusions that, Capcom's going to just revert back to the old classic survival horror formula that they used for the first few Resident Evil games. But I would like to see a more classic approach taken through a downloadable title, something that's like $15, $20. I think, with the global scale that the Resident Evil universe is operating at now, I think there are plenty of opportunities to create new characters in new places that can, kind of go through that experience of, waking up and finding that there's some sort of act of, of biological terror, and, they have to survive. But as far as what I actually think is going to happen with Resident Evil, I think it's going to continue moving forward in a more action-based format. I think that eventually the sales are going to start to decline, and I think that Capcom's going to have to reboot. similar to what they've already done with Devil May Cry, and arguably similar to what they've already done with Resident Evil 4. That was really a reboot for the entire series.
Yeah, to some extent, yeah, it was. Definitely a new direction for it. I feel Devil May Cry is almost an experiment for them. I don't believe Devil May Cry needed the reboot as much as Resident Evil does, but they did it anyways. It's not as big of a series for them, and I think they might actually be thinking about rebooting Resident Evil. It's still selling tremendously well, though, unfortunately. So Capcom's very money-driven, but you think they might want to make a Resident Evil 2 remake if they're money-driven. If you go to any of their forums or anything, you know, half the topics are Resident Evil 2 remake. It's something I would certainly buy. I think everyone in here would definitely, that'd be a day one purchase for everyone. I mean, does that agree?
I actually rented Resident Evil 6 just because I was concerned whether it would be worth my money or not. But I did.
Yeah, but Resident Evil 2 remake style of Resident Evil 1 remake.
Yeah, I'd be on
I think
board.
Kojima's or Abdul is not listening. But we'll go.
I'm sorry. What?
What did that?
Would you buy a Resident Evil
I don't
2
think he's listening.
remake if it was like the same as Resident Evil 1? Like a Resident Evil 2 remake, would you buy?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, but like, I don't get it. What's the significance here? I mean, of course, I would love to get a 2 remake, but why 2 of all games? I don't see the.
Because it's
Arguably
the
the
most
best
popular
of the
Resident
classic
Evil
ones.
title, and it's all over the forums that they're thinking of making a
Oh,
Resident
okay. They actually mentioned that?
Talked about it for a few minutes.
Oh wow. Okay, I had no
Are
idea.
you not listening to what Josh was saying?
I think I'm gonna leave this in the edit. If anyone's listening an hour and a half in, they're probably. I think I'm just gonna leave it.
When did you mention it?
Right before I asked you your opinion on it, for about 2 or 3 minutes, I was talking.
Oh wow. I don't know how I missed that. My bad.
It's the same reason Abdul thought you didn't mention the multiplayer at all in your Halo 4 review. He's like, oh,
Yeah,
that's a good review. He should have mentioned the
said-
multiplayer. I was like,
Are you kidding me?
What are you talking about? He
Yeah,
talked
but
about
That's the
I
majority
had
of
to-
the
majority
review.
of the review.
Dude, I had to go back and watch it again. I was like, oh my god, how did I miss that the first time? I don't know.
If anyone listening right now, please watch our other videos and make sure to like and subscribe.
Oh yeah, there's some
And watch
some
the
good
Halo
reviews
4
out
video.
there.
And pay attention.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, they're
No,
really
I talked
great
very
reviews.
quickly in the Halo 4 one because it was, you know, 1,800 words, and I was worried first video to upload on YouTube had to be under 10 minutes. So I want you to keep listening to it over and over again to gather a little bit more every time.
I want you to be honest with me. Did you do some kind of audio effect? Cause the way your voice echoes and there's something that sounds different than how I hear
I just
you
changed
now,
my
if
voice.
that's- Ah, okay.
In the 11 years since the initial release of Halo, Combat Evolved. Like, you just changed the way you talk.
Okay,
In the 11
okay.
years since the initial release of Halo Combat Evolved comes Halo 4.
Hey, this is Nathan. We're gonna take a look at Deadlight for a little bit.
Hey,
so-
this is Nathan.
Come on
with
down.
Analog Reviews, and today we're gonna take a look at Dark Souls.
Hey, this is Nathan with Analog Reviews, and today we're having
There
a
it
look at Dark Souls, as well as the additional downloadable
I'm seriously
content
leaving all this in the final
Artorias
cut.
of the Abyss. Developed by From Software and published by Namco Bandai, Dark Souls is a third-person action
It's a
RPG
little bit of a
whose
teaser, a little
spiritual
bit of a
successor
teaser,
to
upcoming
Demon
video.
Souls.
Alright, settle.
While
settle.
Demon Souls is a PlayStation 3 exclusive, Dark Souls is available on the
Yeah, it is.
Xbox 360, the PS3, as well as on PC.
Alright, that's being left in the final edit. Okay, so moving on.
Expectation.
So what do you think of the future Resident Evil, Nathan? Where it's gonna be going?
Sadly, I think the future is, you know, going to remain the way it is as sort of like an action franchise. That's not what I want. I want it to return to, you know, the classic survival horrors of like the PlayStation 1 generation. But I think it's going to sort of remain as an action game at this point. Sadly, Resident Evil 6 is broken records at Capcom. I think they sold, what was it, 6 million copies in like the first week or something. So, yeah, I think it's going to remain the way it is, sadly.
Justin?
I think Resident Evil 6 is actually, I think it's a step in the right direction. I mean, of course there's a lot of bad things about it, but you can tell they try to implement a lot of new things. They try to bring back some of the old things like the fixed camera angle, They try to use the what were they called? The stupid thing where you have to spin your joystick.
Nope. Quick time
waggling.
events.
Yeah, the quick time event. Yeah, I mean they try to like use those, but they didn't do it well. I think if they polish the game, I think the next one will be really.
I guess it's worth mentioning that, you know, I didn't mind the QuickTime events at all in Resident Evil 4, because in those you just had to press like a sequence of buttons, like it was like A and B or L and R or something, and you just had to press them in time, like during the Krauser fight. Resident Evil 6, it didn't really have that. It was more of a, you know, just waggle the analog stick as fast as you can and break your controller, which I thought was stupid.
I know Trent didn't like the any of the randomness in it, although Nathan and I enjoyed it, like the semi-truck coming out of nowhere at the gas station just slamming into you.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
those are
hilarious.
Or no, the ambulance or whatever. Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah, those are funny. I
Trent hates
mean,
those
we
things.
laughed a lot in Resident Evil 6. Like, it's supposed to be a survival horror, but it was honestly more of a comedy. I mean, when we played through that game, we were just like laughing half the time from just like the random stuff, like the regenerator pushing you down the sink and stuff like that.
Abdul.
For me, when they first announced Resident Evil 6, actually, let's go back a bit before. After I played Resident Evil 5, I had pretty much given up all hope on the series. And when they first announced 6, I didn't even look at the trailers. I wasn't even interested at first. But then my friends told me that the trailers look like it's going back to the roots of the series. So I actually checked them out, and it raised my hopes up. Because all they focused on the trailers was Leon's campaign, but then they had to crush all my hopes with the actual release of the game. For me, I think I learned my lesson twice. I don't have any expectations whatsoever. I'm just gonna wait and see what Capcom have to do. And I'll buy the game definitely when it comes out, and I'll just form an opinion when I play it. But I don't think that they will do a reboot. I highly doubt it, because like you guys mentioned earlier, it's been a pretty successful formula in terms of profits, and Capcom has been I really dislike this trend that's happening. If you look at games such as Azura's Wrath, I mean, the only way for you to get the actual real ending is to buy a downloadable DLC, and it's another Capcom game for those who haven't played it.
No,
But,
Capcom's always been in the money making business. I mean, it's why they release Street Fighter Alpha, Turbo, Super Saiyan. You know, they always
edition.
release expansion games, and they still do it
Yeah,
in an
but,
age of DLC.
Of course, but at least Shinji Mikami stood against that when he picked the GameCube as the exclusive console for the game, and when he made Resident Evil 0 and 1. I heard that, I'm not sure if this is confirmed or not, but I heard that they did not sell as well as the other games, although they were masterpieces design-wise. So with him gone, I guess Capcom has nobody to kind of balance.
I don't know how much of that he was doing when he was working there, though, because I mean, how many versions of Resident Evil 2, 3, and 1 did they release as well? And Resident Evil 4 when he was still with them. I mean, Resident Evil 1's got Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 1 the director's cut, and DualShock version. And the director's cut was actually cutting things out. Yeah,
I actually don't mind.
They've always kind of been
re-releases.
the money-making guy.
Oh, okay. I don't mind the re-releases, just as long as the main one has, top-notch quality that we always expected from Shinji Mikami. I guess since he's gone, that's where the problem started with the Resident Evil series.
I don't know. Lost in Nightmares was still post Shinji Mikami, and there's someone there that knows what the hell they're doing.
Yeah, but you're talking like a 30 to 60 minute experience versus a 13-hour game.
Yeah, and there's no reason that can't be
Oh, it
built
could be.
to a
Yeah.
full game. I'm just saying it's this like
It's
glimmer
amazing
of
they
hope
didn't do
in-
it for Resident Evil 6 though. Now it's
That's
kind
what
of like
pissed
one
me off
step back.
about Lost in Nightmares. I really enjoyed the DLC, but it was also like a slap in the face. It's like,
Exactly.
hey, look, This is what we can do with Resident Evil, but we're not going to do it. We're just going to release a 30-minute DLC. Enjoy it.
Yeah, it's like, you know, your masseuse getting you like halfway to a happy ending and just quitting.
So I will move. Final topic. Wrap this up because it's getting pretty long. How do you think the timeline of Resident Evil compares to that of the video game industry with what's been happening? Games are certainly getting a little more casual and stuff. What would your comment be on that, if you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I mean,
reflects that of the game industry.
I mean, I guess to put it into context, I think that publishers have found that the largest untapped demographic, or the largest demographic they have now, is trying to rope in people who don't normally play games, or who may buy 1 or 2 games a year. So I think that as we've kind of stated, games in general become more casual, more accessible to try and draw those people in. I mean, the Nintendo Wii basically survived because it was able to rope people in who normally don't play games. If you look at the success of games like Call of Duty, for instance, a lot of people I talk to, they don't own any other games. They buy their Call of Duty game every year. And I think that other publishers are really trying to, find a way to appeal to that market. And I think that those of us who do buy several games a year, that do follow the industry, are kind of are paying the price, for the attempt to capture that market. And if you look at Resident Evil, it's a game that started with a very focused and clear design. And starting, as we've mentioned, with Resident Evil 4, the design has become a little more accessible. And I thought that, as I stated too, I think Resident Evil 4 for me was a positive direction. But then as it progressed through Resident Evil 5 and 6, it's progressively gotten even more action oriented, strayed further from the source, and it's kind of followed all. The Resident Evil is the first in many series in my mind that have become more casual and more accessible to the detriment of the franchise as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of how games are these days. They're just, easy, and they appeal to the casual market. Like, if you notice any of the games that come out these days, you play it on the normal difficulty. Normal difficulty these days is like the easy difficulty in the PlayStation 2 generation or the PlayStation 1 generation. It's just designed to appeal to the casual market where, it doesn't really take any skill. Anyone can beat the game. Whereas in the older generations, there was games where, particular people just couldn't beat them. They would play it and they would fail and they'd just never beat the game. Well, these days, the games are designed to be, completed by anyone, regardless of, how much effort you put into it or what your experience is with games. Like Resident Evil 6 on Professional, like the hardest difficulty on Resident Evil 6 Professional is easier than the Resident Evil 1 remake on normal.
It's way easier. It's not even comparable.
Yeah, I mean,
100 times easier.
And I even saw an interview with the producers for Resident Evil 6, and they were talking about they went back and analyzed data for the game because with achievements and everything, they can tell you basically how many people have completed a game that they made, and they were disappointed that I guess only like somewhere around 50% of people who bought Resident Evil 5 actually finished it, and they took that as we've done something wrong because only half the people who bought this game bothered to finish it, and I don't necessarily think that should be the case.
That's probably above average. I mean, I think I saw something with the guys who made Hitman Absolution, and it was significantly less than 50%.
Oh yeah, I mean it's that game is, because I think that game is still far more. I don't want to say difficult, but I think it's a little bit more true to its roots than.
If you play it the way you should play it, yeah. I mean, it's a very easy game if you just run around killing everything. You just shoot things, wait in a room, and shoot them as they come into the door. But you're not going to enjoy the game if you play it that way.
I don't think people these days really actually care about beating it, since the games that sell really well, like Call of Duty. I mean, people mostly play the single player, so I mean, you can't really beat it. You just kill people until you get bored. Which is the same thing.
The multiplayer?
Maybe with yeah. Well, I mean the single player too. Like in Resident Evil 6, maybe Resident Evil 5, maybe people just play it more.
Did you beat it?
People. No, I didn't beat Resident Evil 6.
So there you go. He's one of the demographic.
Yeah, I just played it to entertain my. And when I got bored of suplexing I played. I beat everything except for Chris. I bought the game actually again like 2 weeks ago. Beat Ada's. Or played Ada's, I didn't beat.
Yeah, because they made that unlockable now.
Yeah.
Or you automatically have that unlocked instead of having to beat the game.
Yeah.
I agree. I think in general games are, obviously becoming more casual. They're trying to become more accessible. It's more about money making. They're not developing the quality of games that they used to be, or fulfilling the gaps that in genre types like survival horror. It's kind of disappearing. They're not fulfilling those gaps, and they're just going with whatever makes them the most money now. How can they appeal to the broadest audience? How can they release the game in the shortest amount of time possible and reuse content and things like that? Resident Evil, I think, is certainly reflective of that trend in gaming.
I definitely. I mean, now it's more about pleasing the stakeholders and what sells more, rather than back in the day when the developers had a lot more freedom to put in their idea. Shinji Mikami probably had a lot more power than he did recently. Probably had to please.
Oh yeah,
all of
he's got his own
stuff.
studio. I think he's with Platinum Games now.
He left Platinum Games.
Oh, he did? I
Yeah,
haven't followed him. What's he doing now?
I honestly have no idea. I know he joined another company or created one himself. He's probably working on a new project. I just don't remember the names.
I actually remember hearing that he was going to design like a new survival horror IP with like a new studio or something. So yeah, I don't know.
I didn't play that.
But to put this whole thing in context too, we're talking about freedom and we reflect on, we're kind of nostalgically, back on the day, it wasn't all about profit, but it was all about profit. The difference, however, I think, is the fact that now you have games that cost $20 million and up, whereas back in the day, you might have been able to develop a game for just a couple $1,000,000, and you could expect a really good return, by marketing it to people who just who are gamers. That's their hobby, that's the culture that they're part of. And now when you're putting $20+ million into a single game, you have to look elsewhere to make your money back. That's kind of the scary part. It's the scary thing that we've gotten into with current these current generation of consoles, and of course the upcoming generation of consoles. So I think going forward, to people who are more hardcore, I think the indie scene is going to be a lot more important in terms of getting niche games that we enjoy but can't get on a AAA scale anymore, or can't expect to get on a AAA scale, at least very often. So hopefully the indie developers will step up and fulfill our needs, because I don't think that it's realistic to believe that a company can put $20 million into to developing a survival horror game and necessarily getting it back if it's a strict survival horror title. I may be wrong, and I kind of hope I am at some level, but we'll see.
I think if that gap in the market is there long enough, someone's going to recognize a money-making opportunity to fill it, because there's no competition. I mean, there will be a lot of people that buy a good survival horror game, a mainstream survival horror game.
And I think that's part of the importance of indie developers. Not just in terms of giving us games that we want, but demonstrating to publishers that certain games are profitable and certain games are worth pursuing as far as developing.
And it's a whole different system now. It's a lot more commercialized than what it used to be. I mean, it seems like a lot of publishers certainly have a stranglehold on these developers. I don't know what's going on internally at BioWare, but I mean, look what happened when EA started purchasing them. They went from every game before Mass Effect 2 was an amazing game, and then they start releasing Dragon Age 2. Some of these were probably in development before then, but it seemed like a pretty big coincidence. Once EA took over, the quality of BioWare's development projects went sharply downhill. Dragon Age 2, Mass Effect 3, KOTOR.
It isn't a coincidence. I mean, you're talking about a company that's headed by a guy who's I don't know what his credentials are, but he's probably he has a degree in business. He's not the guy that's the CEO for Electronic Arts is probably not much of a gamer. He's just someone who has devoted his life to business, and now he's running a multi-billion-dollar company. Whereas I was reading a book called The Masters of Doom about John Carmack and John Romero, the guys who founded id Software, and they talked about how basically, they would roll up to a bank, after, pulling in the profits from, Doom or Wolfenstein, and deposit, millions of dollars, into the bank. Just, these guys had no clue as far as business was concerned, what was going on. They just know that they had a successful property, and they were wholly in control of that. So their mindset, their way of going about producing games and whatnot, completely different from someone, who's devoted their life to business. He's not that, someone who's devoted their life to business isn't necessarily concerned about the art or the form of game making. They're concerned about, rolling in the profits. And that's
whether it's even really
the
good
disconnect. Or not. Exactly. It doesn't matter the quality if it sells. Although, you will run your, a franchise through the mud, and ultimately that franchise is going to be less profitable, and you're going to take a hit on it at some point. But
the nice thing is, if you dilute the market so much that every game starts becoming crap,
yeah,
then you just buy the shiniest turd, because you're going to buy it one way or another.
Yeah, and that's kind of, this past year, that's kind of what I feel like has happened. I don't feel that too many games really stood out to me as being incredible or massively enjoyable, or games that I'll see myself playing 5 years down the line. It just was all, games were either somewhat enjoyable or just abysmal. There was
no great game. There was a lot of good games, a few really good games. There was no great game. I mean, we saw it with the Game of the Year decisions on various websites and VGA and stuff. There wasn't a consistent winner between them all, and just to touch briefly without going into too detail, just they all kind of seem to go on the theme, let's pick an indie game because that's a cool thing now, let's all pick an indie game to win. I wasn't real appreciative of that fact, because I did think just because a great game like Borderlands 2 or something like that, just because it's a AAA game and you don't want to fall into that format, I mean, I would have a hard time arguing Walking Dead or Journey or something being the best game of last year.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed The Walking Dead, playing through it. I thought it was sort of a fun experience, but there's no way I can justify it being better than a game like Borderlands 2. I mean, there's no way.
Yeah, I mean, it's another one of those things. We played through the game together. If you played through Borderlands 2 by yourself, it's not really the way it's meant to be played. I could certainly see it falling short of that, but if you play through with people you like and you have a lot of fun with it, I mean, we've spent over 100 hours into that game, and we'll still go back to it when they release more content down the road. It's just a perfect game for us as well, so it's kind of hard to describe that, but I just hope this doesn't become a trend. I mean, XCOM was another one, I believe. That certainly had a lot of shortcomings when I played it. I thoroughly enjoyed that game, but comparing it to like Final Fantasy Tactics and things like that, it wasn't on that same level.
Like, one of the only games in recent memory that, for this generation, that I can think of that appeals to our demographic as gamers, that, doesn't try to be casual at all, is Dark Souls, which I'm reviewing now, which is really an amazing game. And, I mean, it has one difficulty mode. There's no easy, there's no medium, there's no hard, there's no professional, just one difficulty mode. It's designed to be, challenging but fun. It actually gives you a sense of accomplishment for, beating bosses and stuff, which games don't do at all this generation. And I mean, either you beat the game or you don't. And I mean, either way, it's like over a 50-hour experience, and you'll have fun with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, when's the last time you guys went out and bought a game and then picked it up and wondered, I wonder if I'm going to be able to finish this game or not, and not in terms of, I wonder if it's going to capture my attention, so I'll finish it. But generally, I wonder if I have the skill to complete this game.
Yeah, it's been a while.
There's nothing this generation.
I didn't get that with Dark Souls.
The only thing is Dark Souls.
I was going to beat that.
Yeah, I mean, Dark Souls, to be honest, if you're patient, it's easily, you can easily overcome, whatever.
What about Ninja Gaiden 2 on the hardest difficulty?
Well, you're going into another territory there. You're going into, first of all, Ninja Gaiden 2 is, I don't think to me, it wasn't harder than DMC 3 on the hardest difficulty.
No,
but
it was kind of cheap.
You're going into the territory of changing difficulties after you've beaten the game already. I mean, like Resident Evil 1 has that explosive, invisible zombie that chases you around. That's way harder than Ninja Gaiden 2, in my opinion. I mean, there's a lot of games that are going to be very difficult if you go, am I going to beat this on the hardest difficulty? It just depends on how it's structured, but that's kind of entirely different than the main difficulty or the way it forces you to play.
Ninja Gaiden 2 on normal, for example, was pretty easy. I think I like died once throughout the game on normal, and I mean that's much easier than games like Dark Souls or the older Devil May Cry's. I mean, sure, on the hardest difficulty, I'm sure it's challenging, but you know, it's not the same as having a game where the default difficulty is too hard for people to beat.
And that's something I brought up XCOM, but I did appreciate XCOM is a game that you can fail. I like those games where you could invest 8 to 10 hours into a game and get to a point where you didn't play well enough to beat the game. XCOM is one of those games you can fill out your crisis meter or whatever it was in that game and really not beat the game. Same with Resident Evil game.
Sid Meier's always does that with his games. Like, you always have the potential to fail. That's why I like his games. Like all the Civilization games, if you're playing, you know, on a hard difficulty, you have the potential of, you know, dying later on and having your entire civilization wiped out and, you know, potentially losing, you know, 20, 30 hours worth of time. But at the same time, you know, it's more rewarding. It's a challenge.
Yeah, they need to make more games with that. I know Borderlands 2 beating the raid bosses was fun. That's a challenge, but it's rewarding when you do it. Yeah, that kind of wraps it up. Does anyone have any closing statements or anything to add?
Yeah, I think that, like Trent earlier mentioned, whenever you feel that you just had enough with AAA titles, I'm sure a lot of you had that feeling at one point. I think you'll find salvation in indie games such as the ones on Steam or even the ones on the portable consoles, especially the DS and the 3DS. Some of those games really do remind me of the older generations and the gaming industry, how it was the golden days. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Alright, so I think that that wraps up our first Analog Reviews discussion. Please like or subscribe our channel. We thank you if you made it all the way through this. I mean, it's almost like 2 hours long now. We'll be making more of these in the future. If you would like to see a topic that you feel should be covered in a future discussion, please post that in the comments or send us an email. If there's nothing else, yeah.
Over and out.
Yeah, this
Thanks again for watching.
Our discussion, and stay tuned for my Dark Souls review. If you agree with most of our points and want to, you know, play an old classic challenging game that's next gen, check out Dark Souls.
As you can hear, like the scotch in the background is tumbling.
If you agree with us or you disagree with us, leave a comment. We're not like other YouTube channels who just ignore your comments. We'll always respond. So go ahead and leave something constructive or call us a bunch of fucking idiots. I mean, either way, we'll respond.
Yep, see ya.